Throughout history, archaeologists have unearthed remains that tell stories far more chilling than any horror film. These aren't just ancient bones gathering dust in museum basements. They're frozen moments of absolute terror, preserved for thousands of years, waiting to reveal their darkest secrets. From ritual executions in murky bogs to the apocalyptic fires of volcanic destruction, today's examination covers 6 of the most brutal deaths ever discovered by science. Keep watching till the end. In the year 2000, peat diggers unearthing the Uchter moor in the north of Germany discovered a corpse, young, loping towards girlhood, remarkably preserved thanks to the bog's acidity and lack of oxygen. But this wasn't a lucky discovery of a historic corpse. There was murder, frozen in time. The girl would have been approximately 16 to 19 years old at the time of death, approximately 650 BCE, so she would be approximately 2,700 years old today. What the researchers found was indicative of brutality with ritualistic precision that defies comprehension. A woolen blindfold covered her eyes, as well as bonds behind her hands. However, true horror existed in what is known as the triple death among archaeologists. She died not once, but 3 times in short succession. The first was a deep cut across her throat, severing significant blood vessels. The second was the braided cord that was wound around her neck, which left its mark on her as she was discovered. The final one was drowning her in the bog itself. This was not an easy kill, as it took several people and coordination. What kind of motive could ancient people have had to migrate so far? The generally accepted answer is that she was a human sacrifice to Germanic gods, probably made in difficult circumstances, such as drought and famine. There is also a theory that perhaps she was accused of some serious crime, such as adultery or theft, and this violence served as punishment and purification. Iron Age Germanic religious beliefs surrounding bog sacrifices were complex. The victims were carefully selected, and their mode of death was filled with religious significance. Triple death could perhaps serve as some sort of insurance, an assurance that she actually made it into the afterlife. The blindfolding of the woman also adds a touch of mysticism. Was it out of mercy, so she would not see her murderers? Or perhaps out of fear, so she would not recognize who was killing her? The shaved left side of her head also suggests some kind of ritualistic activity. The strength of this find has less to do with the body itself, and more to do with the associated story contained within the bog, the moment in time when she died. This teenager comes from a world where the notions of justice, religion, and violence intertwined. From the cold bogs of Germany to the banks of the Nile, the next case involves victims over a period of thousands of years. Archaeological finds include human remains with certain signs of crocodile attack. There were, however, cases that were not accidental. These indicated ritualistic kills via crocodile. The Egyptians of long ago had a very complicated view of crocodiles. They revered the god Sobek, who was depicted as a crocodile and was a god of the Nile, fertility, and combat. They mummified and buried the revered crocodiles. They were, nonetheless, aware of the damage those creatures could inflict upon human flesh. Death at the jaws of a crocodile is one of the most vicious ways to die in the animal kingdom. The Nile crocodile has one of the most ferocious bites in the animal kingdom, with a biting force of 3,700 pounds per square inch. The Nile crocodile tends to use a death roll on its victims, holding them firmly and thrashing them violently underwater while still conscious. Such archaeological finds show that these deaths were not all random acts. Skeletons include evidence of people being tied prior to death, with signs of rope marks on the wrist bones. Such people were probably thrust into water, infested with crocodiles for the purpose of execution. The offenses that led to such punishment were serious enough: treasonous acts against the pharaoh, violation of temples, or heinous killings. The bite marks on the recovered bones speak for themselves. The extent of crushing injuries reveals the grip of the crocodiles, strong enough to splinter the bones. The absence of limbs and the dispersion of remains are indicative of feeding frenzies. Cases of repeated crocodile attacks on the same body are also found. What makes this scenario especially chilling is its religious undertones. For Egyptians, death at the hands of a crocodile was more than just biological death. This was judgment at the hands of Sobek himself. The victims were purified via their death. The bodies were not given proper burial ceremonies afterwards. This denied the soul eternal rest. The cultural irony here is breathtaking. The very same civilization that mummified crocodiles, revering them, also used the very same crocodiles as instruments of execution. The victims of this mode of execution rank among the most terrifying in the annals of history. in which the executioner was a prehistoric animal, and the place of execution was the river itself. August 24th, 79 CE, will go down in history as the day that Mount Vesuvius released one of the worst volcanic eruptions the Earth has ever seen. 2 thriving cities would be overwhelmed by the fury of the Earth within hours. Over 2,000 victims have been found, all of them a frozen image of sheer terror locked in a layer of volcanic ash. The victims suffered 2 vastly different kinds of death, and both were decidedly cruel. In Pompeii, they died of suffocation, buried alive by the volcanic ash, and smothered by toxic gases in their lungs. But in Herculaneum, an even more ghastly event took place. The speed of the pyroclastic flow, a hot, superheated cloud of gas and volcanic materials, reached over 100 miles per hour. These temperatures ranged between 300 and 600 degrees Celsius. Current research has uncovered the swift manner of death of the Herculaneum victims. Boiling of their blood was instantaneous due to the high temperatures. Their brain tissues actually vaporized, developing pressures that made their skulls burst. The famous plaster casts are in moment-of-death poses. The Garden of the Fugitives presents 13 people crouched together in torment. 2 victims, referred to as the embracing couple, died in an embracing position. The most tragic figure is likely to be seen in The Chained Slave, who is held in place by chains of iron as he waits to be smothered alive in ash. In the boathouses of Herculaneum, more than 300 individuals took shelter with hopes of escaping through boats. They never escaped. The pyroclastic flow instantly killed them. The intensity of the heat was so great that it vaporized wood boats, yet skeletons were preserved. The brutality of these deaths was not just in the pain. The brutality was in the psychological tortures. The volcano gave the villagers hours of warning. Earth tremors, weird clouds, the falling ash. They had time to understand the events that would befall them, to witness loved ones make the impossible decisions. Do they stay together, or do they split? Some victims were able to survive the first explosion, but slowly died from burns and toxic gas. Some were buried under collapsing buildings that crushed them to death. Some pregnant women died protecting their babies. Families were torn apart with no reunion possible. It has been possible, thanks to modern technology, to research these victims in a manner that otherwise would never have been possible. The volcanic ash had preserved everything, resulting in the world's longest crime scene investigation, as these were more than mere fatalities. There were entire communities that were destroyed in one day, and their moments of death were frozen in time for 2,000 years. In the Ötztal Alps, 2 German hikers had a remarkable find in September 1991. They thought they saw a climber, whom they assumed had died recently, come out of the melting ice. The authorities were notified, and it turned out this corpse dated around 5,300 years ago, making it the oldest naturally mummified human found in Europe. But the analysts were not just interested in the corpse of the ancient traveler who had died of exposure. They were interested in the corpse of a murder victim, one whose story would captivate the world. The man who was known as Ötzi the Iceman was around 45 when he died, which was quite old in the Copper Age. He was 5 feet 3 inches tall and had the tools necessary to survive in the mountains. The tools consisted of a copper axe, a bow, and arrows, and other tools. The clothes that he was wearing comprised skin from several different animals. There were 61 tattoos on his body, likely used for therapeutic purposes. The last meal that he had was ibex and grain, consumed roughly 2 hours before his death. For many years, it was believed that Ötzi died from exposure. Then in 2001, new X-rays showed something astonishing: an arrowhead embedded in his left shoulder. The arrow was fired from below and from behind, slicing through a main artery. It was murder, plain and simple. However, the struggle did not end with the arrow. The skull showed signs of blunt trauma. This was from the struggle, which ultimately resulted in death high in the Alps. The hands had defensive injuries, which were indicative of a struggle involving hand-to-hand combat. This caused massive internal bleeding, although it was not immediate death. Ötzi was able to pull out the arrow shaft, although the arrow tip was buried too deeply to be removed. With blood streaming down his body, Ötzi started to climb again, only to finally collapse in a rocky gully at an elevation of 10,500 feet. He then suffered from hypothermia and died frozen in a fetal position, alone in the mountains. There are many theories about the actual cause of Ötzi's death. One theory is that he was the victim of a revenge assassination, perhaps related to some kind of intertribal fighting. Another theory suggests that he was robbed, but this seems unlikely due to the fact that he was still carrying his precious copper-headed axe. A third theory suggests he was attempting to escape a battlefield and was hit with a projectile by an archer. The chilling aspect about this murder is the fact that the perpetrator was following the victim into the mountains, following him as he climbed despite the injuries he was suffering with, determined to finish what had been started. The modern methods of forensic science have yielded some astounding results. His genetic analysis has revealed that he had brown eyes, was lactose intolerant, and had the propensity for heart trouble. He had arthritis, cavities, and Lyme disease, and was already suffering from pain when someone stuck an arrow in his back. There is even a curse legend. 7 different people who were involved in the discovery have died in strange ways, sparking rumors about an ancient curse. The scientific community simply sees this as a coincidence. Ötzi still stands as one of the greatest treasures of archaeology, as well as a cold case that has never been solved. Ötzi's murder occurred over 5,000 years ago, yet it continues to fascinate researchers and the public alike. On the 22nd of August 1485, English King Richard III made a fateful move that would change the course of his life forever. Seeing his opponent, Henry Tudor, across the battlefield, he led his final desperate charge. This move was to cost him dearly. King Richard III was to be the last English monarch to give his life on the battlefield, and he was to do so with anything but dignity. Richard's burial site had remained a secret for over 500 years. However, in 2012, a surprising find was made in a parking lot in Leicester, where archaeologists discovered a skeleton with scoliosis and proved it to be Richard III through DNA analysis. The skeleton's story was gruesome. Forensic analysis indicated there were 11 distinct injuries, 9 of them to the skull. It was no quick killing. It was an extensive, brutal pounding. The killing blow was inflicted with a halberd to the back of the head, with enough force to sever part of his cranium and embed itself deeply in his brain. A blow from a sword sliced through the base of the skull. A dagger had been driven upwards into his brain. Richard was unhorsed during the battle and then found himself encircled by the enemy. He had his helmet wrenched from his head, and this exposed his face and body. The aftermath that ensued was the execution of the king in the guise of battle. The violence did not end with his death. Forensic pathologists find evidence of humiliation wounds on his body that were inflicted when he was already dead. The pelvic wound can be symbolic. The body was disrobed and put on display as proof that Richard Plantagenet was indeed dead. This was about more than a battle. This was about the end of a dynasty. Richard's funeral was rushed and lacked dignity. He was tossed into a common grave at Greyfriars Church, with no sort of royal funeral. This was the final indignity for a king who had ruled England. The conquerors wrote histories and plays about him that made him out to be a tyrant, and this legend stood for many years. The brutality had various functions. It was revenge, political theater, intimidation of would-be rivals, and propaganda indicating how easily even a monarch could be degraded. Finally, in 2015, the royal burial rites were accorded to Richard III. His burial took place at Leicester Cathedral. The king, known as the King of the Parking Lot, had finally found a dignified burial, although this happened 527 years later. If you are interested, then do not forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video.